Do you think that there shouldn't be a civil rights movement, or do you think it shouldn't have happened up till now, and then it would have been a more obvious struggle?
I think there shouldn't have been a civil rights movement at all.
That's how I feel, man. Power to the whites.
Oh my God.
I personally, I don't see what was so bad with slavery. We had house, home, food.
If you want to compare it to
Stop
modern,
getting whipped and shit like that, man.
I mean, but you're getting whipped because you didn't do your job, right?
all right, Tonks.
Whereas now
Tonks,
it's like you don't
just
make
stop.
any money.
Just stop.
You have no. So you see what I'm saying?
Oh, true that. Now I know what you're saying.
Well, you see, this is something that you should kind of consider. Is it really a problem with the abolition of slavery? That's the issue here. Is it more or less an issue with the current social conditions that make slavery seem halfway appealing?
I think they should definitely bring back slavery. I mean, it will help get some of these people off the street. It will give them food. It will give them a house and a place to raise their children.
And while we're at it, we might as well just eliminate the Jews too, right? Put them back in concentration camps.
I mean, now that's completely different, though, right? I mean,
it's not really though.
Well, but slavery as an alternative for instead of focusing on welfare, just have slavery alternative.
Okay. But I don't know. Comparing slavery to the things that came with slavery, you could easily compare it to genocide. I think like 19 million people died in the Pacific. Yeah, I think it's called the Pacific slave trade. That's on boats from Africa and then.
Yeah, that's back then. We got better working conditions now.
I'm talking about like just within the country, slavery as an alternative.
So like voluntary slavery.
Essentially, or
I think that's what we have already.
No, what we have is a stupid welfare system that's broken, right?
Well, I'm just saying, so what you're saying is instead of going on welfare, people should sign up to be slaves.
Yeah. I mean, it's because
you're black, right?
You already have a negative idea of slavery. My thing is slavery necessarily was just a form of labor where afterwards the pay was, which, well, for white people back then was a sense of God, home, and they felt they were being liberating, or they were liberating them from Africa, the harsh conditions of Africa. Now, the problem with the slave trade was that, of course, they're trying to bring over people on a boat that they felt was naturally inferior, and the story kind of grew into this hateful thing. But you can have a non-hateful slave situation. Instead of beating, since apparently that's illegal in the United States, you can do things such as restricted food vices or something like that.
It's also illegal to have slaves.
Well, that's because it's from you're assessing a system that was broken, right?
Well, okay. Tom, so are you black? Yes,
yeah, I'm black.
I thought so. That's very interesting coming from you. I don't believe that you're truthful about this. But if you were, I really don't understand why you take that position. Because, I mean, even if someone is not, even if someone was treated completely, treated well, and they're given, as much food as they want and water, if they were good, what about the people that are not? What about the people that are trying to do good, but they, for example, don't produce as much as their masters? Hang on. He is not attacking this position very well. You're basically, I don't know, sorry, I don't mean to criticize you that directly, but you're basically attacking a technicality in this problem. There's kind of fundamental issue here, is that as long as there's any form of structural violence, there's going to be hatred involved in slavery. There's going to be a serious disenfranchise.
Well, then you simply cast them back out and then have them fend on their own. I feel like they're given the opportunity where they can try, if there's some type of background from the infrastructure in their family or anything like that, it could possibly be fixed when you don't have to worry about all the stresses that's accommodated with normal life. And welfare and food stamps does not work because it's too much centralized filth in one neighborhood for it to all propagate through in order for people to come out from it. So you need to divide it up, bring them down to the south, put them on a farm, have them do farm stuff, put them in your house and being your maids and shit, and then eventually from there it will propagate to where they can possibly do something meaningful, have their kids still go to school and stuff like that, but when they come home they have a certain job they need to do, and then from that, when they get back on their feet, provide them with some type of workplace initiative or workplace uh, pack or something to help them towards getting an actual job, and that can flow after you get the necessary work ethics and all those other good principles to where
So,
they can be
Tonks,
self. Yo,
you're saying that as slaves we should pay them more than our minimum wage workers so that they eventually rise above and are able to get real jobs?
you have to pay them more than minimum wage workers. As
Well, you
far
have to, because if you pay minimum wage workers, they're below the poverty level.
below the poverty level, yeah. But
And they
you
require.
say you put some of these people in places where you don't have to even worry about paying. You know, like they could work for Miley Cyrus.
Well, yes, but I mean, these people that are working as slaves will not be able to go above the position as slave because they won't make enough money. They'll never make enough money to be able to go into the real world.
But they'll have the
Unless
they'll
you
have
pay them well.
the issue is
But
they'll
most
still
people on
have the
welfare aren't
opportunity
gonna go to
to.
real world
Yeah,
either.
yeah. People in
Well,
welfare are not in the real world.
That is true.
Okay,
People
well,
that
hang
are
hang
on
on.
welfare usually are not able to go in the real world because they're on
But-
welfare. However,
Well,
a
hold
lot
on,
of people
hold
on
on, hold
welfare,
on, hold on.
like for example, I know quite a few people that are on welfare that are college students, or for example, that work minimum wage jobs. That
Yeah,
if they were
yeah.
not on
But that's a
programs, they
special.
wouldn't be able to pay for their food.
case, though, right?
That's actually not really a
That's
special
not.
case.
It's not.
If you're on welfare, then or if you work a minimum wage job, which I can't remember where it came out, but I read it was like 30% of the country does. No, it's not 30%. Anyway, it's pretty high. It's a good section of the population. It's enough that it's a serious concern, and it can't be just discounted as especially you're on welfare, or if you're not on welfare, then you're barely scraping by, but you could qualify for welfare. And
I qualified for welfare for a long time when I was working for Starbucks.
Yeah, I mean, you qualify for welfare if you work anywhere near the minimum wage in this
That's
country.
clearly a broken system. Then.
It is a broken
Oh, it
system.
absolutely is.
But
Yeah.
I mean, like saying that slavery would fix that is, I don't think that's correct.
Slavery will help fix the issues that plague the typical ghetto.
The issue is that they don't have the mobility necessary to move up out of that ghetto. And so I don't think slavery will
and-
fix that.
I mean, but the problem comes from the issues in the ghetto itself, and they can't get out
You were moved.
because they don't have the mobility to get out. And food stamps and all
Okay.
stuff is not helping. That's just giving them food. They might as well just be working as a slave.
So I don't know if you'd want to call this specifically what I'm about to explain slavery. I personally wouldn't. But if you were to let someone come and go as they please, who are, as opposed to applying for welfare, they go apply for this. They can leave whenever they want. Can opt out. If you were to provide them with a home, with food, with all this stuff, as long as they keep working, and it was like a full provide welfare system, so long as you to do this job, I think that would be decent. But I don't think that's really the same as socialism, I think that's more along the lines of socialism, like Stalinist socialism, if anything. But rather than, whereas slavery, it's like you're forced into this situation, and I mean, historically, it's usually been based off of usually it's been a racial prejudice. Although in Africa during the really early, before we went there was still slavery. It wasn't nearly as widespread, but it was other tribes enslaving each other, which I guess you could also argue is racial. But in any case, I don't think that, calling what we're talking about slavery would be incorrect. Because, I mean, there were a lot of situations where people took care. I mean, they were their slaves. They were like cattle, so you take care of them to a degree. But at the same time, they got no reward for what they did. They were purposely kept ignorant, so they couldn't fend for themselves.
If people want to be treated as property, they can be treated as property. It's simple.
Well, okay, but then
A
at
lot
that
of
point,
people see themselves as being property, so
User
you might as well
disconnected
just go
from your
ahead and make
channel.
it something tangible.
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, like, a lot of times we are considered property. I think that that's not completely inaccurate, but at the same time, I guess the institution of slavery, it was something that was very, very structural beyond the point of considering people property. It was built to keep an entire race in the dark. It was built to specifically enslave, a certain race. And make sure that, there were slave uprisings at some points, and then after that, they completely reworked the way they practiced in their cities and stuff to make sure that wouldn't happen again. It was a constantly adapting system to ensure the subjugation of a certain class of people.
I don't think what Tonks is talking about is the traditional
User
slavery
entered your
back in the
channel.
day.
Yeah, well,
Well, I mean, traditional slavery back in the day has a lot of things associated with it that aren't necessarily necessary. Right? Like the entire racial prejudice, hatred, whipping. There needs to be a form. If you refuse to do your
User
thing,
in
you
your
can
channel
refuse to do your
timed
thing,
out.
but you won't get something that you find is necessary,
You
right?
get kicked off the program.
Yeah.
But okay, this is my biggest issue with this entire discussion, is that the biggest problem, like, okay, there's a lot of arguments that people say on welfare on purpose. From my experience, and I know a lot of people who've been on and off welfare, it's not something most people are comfortable with. It's not usually comfortable living.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and so I mean, like, the problem isn't so much that there's all these ghettos and stuff. I mean, like, if you want to create a softer solution to what we have now, then some kind of welfare system that also rehabilitates, and it might look like a work camp a little bit. That's maybe one option. But
Or we
more
could
so
raise the minimum wage so that the
Yeah.
living off minimum wage do not live in poverty and don't need food stamps.
that's kind of where I was going. Is that, like, if you were to improve the social conditions that people live in, this whole thing might not be necessary.
Yeah, but I mean, it's sort of hard. I mean, you can raise the minimum wage all you want. If you're just feeding into the same problems that's fueled by money, anyways, what's the difference? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, but the people
minimum
that are
wage
on
is
minimum wage.
the minimum wage is too low. All right, fine. It's not a working wage for them to work with, or for them to live off of. But I mean, are they actively using all their money toward what they need to be?
It doesn't matter because if you make enough on minimum wage, you are not qualified for food stamps. But if you make the current minimum wage, you are because you're below the poverty level. So if you were to make $15 an hour, you wouldn't qualify for food stamps. You wouldn't have to worry about abusing that. They would obviously have to pay for food because they're not getting any from the government. But if they don't, if they get the current minimum wage, they're allowed to get it from the government because they're
Well,
below
I'm
the
looking
poverty
at
level.
I'm looking at very specific subclass of people, right? I'm not talking about the people that are technically qualified for minimum wage because of pure fiscal stuff. I'm talking about food stamps for just based off money. I'm talking about the people that are on food stamps and stuff because the entire community system that they're in is fucked. Which then you can't just give more money into that because it's not necessarily going to change anything.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that I thought you were gonna say for a second, because this is a really common argument that kind of irks me a little bit, is that people opt to stay into poverty, which is something that happens, but it's not nearly as big of a problem as people make it out to be. But I mean, the idea, yeah, I mean, I can see that there's problems with community
Well, no,
that cause this.
No, I wouldn't say that it's not a huge deal, but it definitely happens to the point where it's worth mentioning. I'll say.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but at the same time, I mean, like,
Because I know people that do that. I've sold plenty of shit to them that probably wasn't supposed to sell to them. But I know
The
people-
vast
And then,
majority of people
I'm not gonna
though
lie.
actually use it for a purpose.
yeah, and well, okay, so like, let me say, I have 4 friends who've been on and off welfare. One of them, their mom, she doesn't necessarily regret being on welfare. She tends to kind of take advantage of the system. But she's also the mother of 3 kids that she did not have on purpose. Like, for lack of a better word, they were accidents.
Then
And
she
maybe they
needs to
should
be
have.
on welfare. That's
Yeah.
fine. I'm talking about
Yeah.
people that actively don't try to do anything at all. Right. That's why I consider to be people taking advantage of it. If you're in a situation where you are not fit to be, doing it, then that's understandable. I'm talking about those situations where people seem to be issues in the community to where welfare and food stamps and trying to help them out financially is not going to help the situation altogether. Like, you can talk about the people that don't make enough money just from their job. They need food stamps to supplement. I'm talking about people that don't have any money. You give them food stamps still, but the problem is it's not helping anything out because they're going, trading this shit for other stuff. Not doing what they need to be doing.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't think that that's nearly as predominant as. I think that it is something that happens, but I don't think it's that. I don't think it's a humongous problem.
And what you can do is you take the kids from the parents and you put them in some type of pseudo-slavery, whatever you want to call it, facility. Give them an education, and it's going to help the parents out because that's something else they don't have to worry about. Take them away when they're like 13, bring them back when they're 17, they'll be fine.
You know my position on the poverty thing. It's going to be cliche if I keep on mentioning it, but
And the civil rights movement was a sham in order to circumvent personal development.
I will argue that the civil rights movement was hijacked by some people who weren't really actually down with the entire thing. But I don't know about that other part. By what do you mean personal development? Because I mean, like, there was structural violence, and, like, you know, a structure built around not letting people succeed. And it wasn't nearly as predominant during segregation days as it was during the early Jim Crow days, but it was still definitely there.
User entered your channel.
That's all the more incentive to grow oneself personally.
Can't tell if you're joking or not. It's freaking me out.
No, he's not, man. He's serious.
I've never ever heard someone argue for slavery before.
It's interesting. Now, I might argue that during slavery days, slaves were better off than people were in the North, like the Irish and the laborers who were laboring for like pennies a day. You know, because half the time they couldn't even afford homes, where slaves were provided homes, and that was a common argument by the South back then. But I don't know. Okay.
User
But I mean,
disconnected from
you
your
know,
channel.
then again, I don't know. Because slavery, I mean, like, you know, it might have been pretty bad, but there was like the comic relief factor. If that makes sense.
Oh, oh.
For example, like I traced my family back, and our slave owners was this small family in rural Southwest Virginia, and apparently they were on decent terms with I think it was my great great grandfather, and
Are you supposed to feel sad, Fina?
I guess because of that, it was a certain level of mildness. It's always been in my family.
Mildness is genetic. Its calm demeanor just comes from his old black grandfather.
All I gotta say is, go Knowles!
What?
Go Knowles!
What?
Go Knowles!
Stop that.
You can leave.
Fuck you. Someone else are gonna kick Auburn's ass.
Oh, then that's fine.
Okay.